We are back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco in the northern part of the great state that I love. And I'm kind of blessed today because I have a guest from back east. I'm kind of a bi-coastal guy. I was brought up in New York, living out in California. And my guest is about to call in. His name is Steve Goldleaf, and he is, among other things, a fan of someone who I grew up watching and never really appreciated. His name was George Altman. He was a slugging first baseman with the Cubs. And the reason I didn't appreciate him, as I didn't, was that he was traded to the Mets in 64, 65, really early in their fledgling existence, and he didn't do very well. And I, in my sarcastic manner, made a comment on a baseball Facebook site about something about George Altman, a negative remark that he wasn't this and he wasn't that, just kidding around. And Steve Goldleaf from New York came to the defense of George Altman. Steve, are you here yet?
I am.
No, you're not. Oh, here you are. Okay, Steve. So as I love to do is interact with folks who tune into my show, who support it, who say nice things. I'm funny that way. So I figured I'll reach out. We reached out to each other, see if we can get together, have a segment, talk about George Altman, and talk about what Steve Altman, oh, my God. Steve Goldleaf wants to discuss. It's your show tonight, Steve. Talk first about George Altman, though.
All right, well, let me tell you a little bit about why it is that I know anything at all about George Altman, and that's that I'm doing a biography of a very obscure Met who played, in fact, who was traded to the Mets with Altman, and who admires him a lot, a guy named Bill Wakefield. Did you ever hear of him?
I certainly did. I was an original New York Met fan, and somewhere I have a Bill Wakefield baseball card, I'm sure.
Wow, that's very impressive. I mention his name even to hardcore Mets fans, and a lot of them, just draw a blank. But
no name gets by me. It was Ray Davio's birthday the other day, and he was an original Met and a pitcher, and I recognized his name instantly. But he did come from the Cardinals, did Wakefield, and I didn't realize that Altman didn't come from the Cubs to the Mets, came from the Cardinals to the Mets. Who did the Mets give up? I don't remember that.
Well, that was how Roger Craig got traded to the Cardinals, and he played for the Cards in their 64 World Championship team.
Whoa, and I was expecting good things because the Mets were trading off pitchers that were incredibly effective. They traded Alvin Jackson. They traded Bob Miller, who was the right-handed Bob Miller, traded him to the Dodgers in a horrible trade for Harkness and Burright. And I was expecting good things from George Altman, and he didn't do very well with the Mets, let's face it.
Well, I actually mentioned that to Wakefield. Like I said, I'm doing a series of interviews with him because I'm writing a biography for the Society of American Baseball Research. And
right, SABR. That's a great organization.
Great biography.
How did you come to pick him out to do Wakefield out to do a biography on him?
Well, there's a story there. I sort of fixated on him just as this guy who came up in '64, set a Mets record for most appearances in a season that wasn't broken until 1977, so it stood a long time, and he never played in the majors again after that October. So I just mentioned that really didn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, I figured maybe he hurt his arm. Who knows what happened. And I realized that one of the things that he did in 1964 was Wakefield pitched the very first night game, I think it was, at Shea Stadium. And when they opened up Citi Field in 2009, they invited him to come back to New York. He lives in California now. He lives actually not that far from you in Northern California. And he's a Northern California guy, went to Stanford, and he settled out there after his playing career. And they invited him to throw the first pitch at Citi Field, which I thought was a nice gesture. Him and Steve Dillon, who were two pitchers in that first night game against Cincinnati in 1964. So I thought that was my big opportunity. I asked him if he could meet me for a cup of coffee, and we sat right in this little restaurant that it's actually used to be owned by Bobby Valentine right near the Grand Central. And we talked for an hour or two, and I got a story out of it that I published under the title On 45 Years Rest. And, he told me a lot of, I thought, really interesting stuff about the early Mets and about his teammates and about, how it came that he just had that one actually pretty fabulous season as a relief pitcher, and God knows it was a team that really needed pitching, and they just sent him down to the minors the next year, said his arm wasn't hurt at all, and he just never got back to the major leagues. After a while, he just decided that he would do better things with his Stanford BA than pitching little towns in the minors, and he just went into
What did he do with his life? I'm curious about that.
He was actually a kind of a businessman. I mean, he ran some food companies in Northern California, and he ended up having a career finally as an executive for Mattel, the toy company. And he's a guy's probably 77 years old, I think, and he's retired and he's enjoying his life. Doesn't have a lot of regret leaving baseball, and he just said he got out when the getting was good.
Good.
A great story about Altman, because he cleared it up for me, because he admired Altman a lot. He had been his teammate in the Cardinals, then he played that 1 year in the Mets, and the Mets traded Altman at the end of the year, so they had an exactly concurrent history just that 1 year, 1964, with the Mets. And Altman was a kind of disappointment, as you say. They brought him up. He thought he was going to be a big slugger, but it turns out, according to Bill Wakefield, he said that Casey Stengel had seen that what National League pitchers were doing, they discovered after a while, I guess after those first few good years with the Cubs, that if you throw him a fastball up and in, he couldn't get around on it. So NL pitchers just pounded him inside. And Altman actually was traded from the Mets to the Cubs. He didn't do well there. And he was only about 31 years old, I think, when he quit Major League Baseball and went to play in Japan, where it's more of a finesse pitchers league. And he had a really good career in Japan. He played for a long time and was a big hitting star. And he then came back to the States, and he had a long career as a very successful stockbroker and businessman. And Wakefield said he still keeps in touch with George.
How very cool that is. And
I thought it was
how
really
cool that you picked that up when we were talking on one of the Facebook groups. that those years were very difficult being a Met fan in those years, because it was cute in '62, all the losing, and in '63 it wasn't good. By '64, they moved to Shea Stadium, and that's the year that they got Altman. And it wasn't getting much better. Very quickly it wasn't. And it was difficult for, I was just a kid. I was 16 at that time, and used to New York, where it was almost our birthright that the teams we rooted for played in the World Series. Certainly New York teams played in the World Series all the time when I was a kid. And it took some adjusting. I loved the Mets, and my Giants left in '57, at the end of '57, my New York Giants, and they moved to San Francisco. And I was so grateful to have a team to root for, and that you couldn't help
against the Mets when the Giants played them.
No, I never did. And '62, the year they were born, was very difficult for me, because half of my friends were Dodger fans, half were Giant fans. Some kept up with the Giants when they left. I was one of those who followed the Giants when they left to San Francisco, and but really didn't root for them like I did when they were in New York. And I floundered as a fan, and when the Mets came in, I said, hey, I'm going to be devoted to this team, and I'm going to root for them. I rooted secondarily for the Giants. I was glad that they won the pennant. But when they played the Mets, I wanted the Mets to win. It was just like, you guys left, and this team hasn't left yet, and I'm going to root for them, and that's how I felt about it. So, but it wasn't easy. They were horrible. Giants were great in '62. They had a terrific team, and
they were
not only that. Every one of the coaching staff: Alvin Dark, Larry Jansen, Whitey Lockman, Wes Westrom, they were all former New York Giants. When I was a kid in '54, those were the guys that won the pennant. And they were now the San Francisco Giants. And it's taken me a lifetime to, I have a love-hate relationship with the Giants. I live right across the bay from them. I've been somewhat loyal to them over the years, but it's tough following them in San Francisco. Had been. They were on the verge of moving yet again 2 or 3 different times. They almost went to Toronto. They almost went to Colorado. They almost went to Tampa Bay, which is not Tampa Bay, but St. Petersburg. And that in itself is an interesting story that Peter Goldleaf tells of why the Giants weren't able to move to St. Petersburg in those years, that Bill White was the president of the National League, and not only a former New York Giant, but a former St. Louis Cardinal when they did the Cardinals in St. Petersburg. And there was so much prejudice against blacks that he and his fellow teammates, Kurt Flood, Bob Gibson, Lou Brock, they couldn't stay at the hotel that the players could during spring training. Augie Bush, ended up buying the hotel so all the players could stay there. And they're the least progressive city in the United States of America. And when it came time to moving, Bill White was in the fortunate position of being president of the National League, and he said, over my dead body will this team move. And they didn't. They didn't get to move to St. Pete, and that's just a piece of giant history. But they did move in '57, at the end of '57, to California. And the irony is that I was stationed out here in the Air Force in '66 and stayed out in California, and I've been closer to the Giants all my life than I am to the Mets. And it's only recently when it's become easy to follow teams all over the country, well, with the internet and MLB TV and MLB radio. You can get any game at any time. It used to be difficult to follow your team if you weren't right there. So, how's that for a ramble? What do you think of that, Steven?
Well, now, I heard that story. I actually read it in David Halberstam's book on the 64 Cardinals, because I was just researching that team. And, he told some pretty harrowing tales about the trouble that the Cardinals had in getting their spring training facilities integrated. And, a lot of those Cardinals were, very tough guys. I mean, Gibson was as tough as they come, and, he was just not somebody you could put in a second-rate hotel and just have his holiday.
Not just that. What they do to make it palatable, they had families, black families, on the, quote, the other side of the tracks, and that's literally how they referred to the locale, would take them in kind of like they do in the minors, kind of a guest type thing, a family thing. And they take him in and board him, and to be honest with you, the players didn't mind it so much. From that standpoint, they felt loved and cared for by the people that made family out of them. But it was the principle of it. It's the principle of the thing, for Christ's sake. We're not talking about 1915. We're talking about 1964. This is, 17 years after Jackie. There are indignities that we all go through in life for whatever reason. But none so harrowing as when it's the color of your skin and it's instantaneous recognition, and you treat it differently one way or the other, good, bad, or indifferent. And that's something that 200 years from now people won't understand, because everybody will be gray. We will have all come together. But it's going to be a tough 200 years down the road.
Getting that mix down to that fine shade of gray and beige. Right.
And actually, which is what Jews are. That's it. I think we'll all look Jewish. That'll be nice. Steven, how did you come to love baseball the way you do?
That's a good question. I think in my case it was pretty much genetic. My dad was a big Dodgers fan, and I'm sure you know that in the 50s, sports that we could play in the street, like basketball and football, weren't really tremendous sports. They didn't really take off very much. And when I'd get to see my dad, which was pretty rarely, I saw him a couple hours on Saturdays and Sundays, but otherwise during the week he ran a restaurant, and he was just working before I got up and until late at night. And all we could do together really was go out and watch a ball game, or just even talk about baseball. So that was, I found that, when my dad came home and my older cousins came by the house, that nobody was really interested in what I had to say. But when we were talking baseball, they would listen because I would, understand things about the game, and I would ask them good questions, and we would talk. That's I tell you the truth, I really don't see my family very much at all these days. But whenever we get together, I'll sit with my cousin Jerry, and he'll just see me, and his eyes will light up, and he'll say to me, "Veda Pinson," and we'll start talking about the 1960 Reds all over again, like it just happened yesterday.
So he might come back and say Gene Freeze.
Exactly. That's the
Eddie
bond
Casco.
that we had.
Yeah.
That was
nice.
my first introduction into holding my own with the grown-ups.
Do you remember your first game?
Vividly, because Roger Maris was going for his 61st home run.
Holy shit.
And I was sitting out in the right field stands, and I was hoping I would catch Maris's record-breaking home run. And unfortunately,
who did though? Who caught it was a guy named Sal Durante.
That's right.
And big article because there was a guy in Sacramento, and I lived in Sacramento for a lot of years. He owned a restaurant, and he bought that ball for like $200, which is a lot of money in that days. Maybe it was more. And he bought that ball, and he had it up in his restaurant. Anyway, I can't think of the restaurateur's name, but he got some good publicity out of that. And I still remember the Phil Rizzuto call on the radio. It was monumentous. Are you like some that think that Maris should be in the Hall of Fame?
I'm not a big Maris fan. I have a couple of friends who are, and we talk about it now and then. I'm kind of a small hall kind of guy, and I think that there are probably players in the hall I'd like to see out of the hall, as opposed to people like Maris who had a couple of good years, but not really what you'd call a very impressive career overall.
Well, he was MVP twice. He
had a great couple of years.
Yeah.
1960.
And what he did with a sore hand in St. Louis, because his hand never really healed well, and they lied to him with the Yankees, and he hated New York. He wanted to get back to the Midwest, and he decided against his initial judgment to keep playing in St. Louis, and he was terrific with them. He led them to a championship or two, and fit right in with that terrific Cardinal team in the 60s.
Yeah, completely. But there's nothing really there that shows up as dominating hitting. He was mostly, the fact that he knew what he was doing, and he knew how to play his position, and he knew how to hit in situations. But he just didn't put up the numbers after 61. Really, he was an okay power hitter for a few years, and then he just became an okay ball player. And I think his teammates were more taken with his inspirational leadership than his actual ball playing.
Yeah.
And he retired kind of young. He was only about maybe 33 or so when he retired.
That's true. And, too, he died very young, which is incredibly sad. Steve, you still rooting for the Mets?
I've actually managed to wean myself off of the whole concept of rooting, although actually I am going to the Mets game tomorrow. My girlfriend got an extra ticket, and I'm going to go to Citi Field for the first time in probably in 3 or 4 years for tomorrow's game.
Oh,
but
good.
I found that.
I hope you bring him good luck. I hope you bring him good luck. What do you mean getting off the subject of winning and losing, of competition? Are you just rooting for the players? Or you just see things differently as you get older?
Well, it's funny. I actually, I started a website that was a Mets fan website in around, I would say, the year 2002 or so. And I kept it going with this guy who was much more technologically gifted than I am. And after, I think it was, I would say, Willie Randolph became the manager. And I didn't think much of Randolph. I sort of, was just asking questions about why he was doing these dumb things on the field that, just didn't make any sense to me. He didn't know how to, double switch players, and he didn't know how to use his relief staff, and he was just puzzling me no end. And I asked so many disparaging questions about Randolph that people started accusing me of being anti-Met. And I said, no, I'm not anti-Met. I want the Mets to win, but this guy isn't helping us. And I ended up getting into so many arguments with these people that the guy who ran the site with me found a way to get me knocked off the site. So I actually started this very successful Mets fan site that I became banned from, and that kind of made me rethink my whole concept of fanship. That, I actually wrote an article a couple of weeks ago about the concept of loyalty and why people are loyal to not only to ball teams, but to all sorts of other units that they identify themselves. Why you consider yourself a Democrat, or why do you consider yourself, an intellectual? What's your loyalty all about? Are you more loyal to your family? Are you more loyal to, being an East Coast guy? There's so many ways we identify ourselves, and it's through identification with groups. And the more I thought about it, the more I mistrusted that, and I say that
that could be religion,
like a loyal Mets fan or a loyal Red Sox fan.
It could be a religion, too, which is polarizing.
Religion is one of the most tribal things in the world, and people will die for it. And you ask yourself, well, why? I mean, why are you going to defend somebody because he goes to the same, church or synagogue or mosque that you do? And why don't you just think for yourself and figure out what's right instead of what your fellow, religionists or members of any tribe are.
Well, early training comes into it, and over the course of a lifetime, I was brought up in the 50s when Zionism and Judaism were hand in hand 100% of the time. And that's hard when you're brought up that way and you have such early training of especially coming from post-war, all that stuff. I see where it's difficult for people to break away from that early stuff, and you can equate that to rooting for a team, and you can equate that for being a Democrat or a Republican. If your father was a Democrat all those years and this, that, and the other thing, and then you come to find out that the Democrats and the Republicans are really one and the same. I mean, they just play good guy, bad guy every 4 or 8 years. And it's an awakening, and Jews and Muslims aren't that much different, and all these things that do polarize us could end up bringing us together. The more knowledge we acquire in life, and that's
and the more thinking we do. It seems to me that there's all this tribal loyalty substitutes for thinking. It substitutes for making up your mind. It relieves you of the responsibility of having to figure out, what's my position in this? Because you can just say, well, I understand what, the Democrats' position or the Jews' position or Americans' position is. And I just don't think that's a healthy thing for society. And I certainly don't think it's a healthy thing for individuals just to, give up their ability to reason and to figure out what they think they actually need and want instead of just, what their tribe is telling them to do.
Yet, when the first pitch goes off tomorrow night, you'll be rooting for the Mets.
Well, tell you the truth, I can't even remember who they're playing against, so it's going to be easy for me to root for the Mets. But again, that's a New York thing. I mean, I get to see the Mets on SNY all the time. It's usually what I do of an evening, even though I'm not, a fanatical rooter for the team anymore. But I know the ball team backwards and forwards, so it's certainly easier for me to, follow the team on a day-to-day basis. But I really do try, to abstract myself. And actually, to tell you the truth, it's become very, very successful for me because what happens is that when the Mets win, I feel good. I feel, wow, my team won tonight. And when they lose, I think, all those people who gave me a hard time on that website, they're miserable right now. That makes me feel good.
Right. That's a good way of looking at it. So every game is a no-lose situation for Steven Greenleaf. And how bad
Exactly. That's
right.
it's kind of remarkable that I.
All right, Steven. I hope you'll come back another time and we'll chat more. You were very enlightening, and you brought up Bill Wakefield. As we were talking, I'm looking for his baseball card. I remember his baseball card being horizontal for some reason. I don't know what it was, but
somebody else on it.
It might have been. It might have been. But I did come across another rookie card of that era, a guy named Dick Selma, and that was a horizontal card with somebody else on it. So
I'm going to guess Rob Gardner.
Rob Gardner, the pitching coach with the Giants?
I don't know. Did he do pitching coach for the Giants? I'm not even sure. Is that what you remember?
Rob Gardner pitched for the Giants from Fresno. He pitched, and I think he's an assistant pitching coach, bullpen coach with the Giants to this day.
Selma's from Fresno.
Selma is.
Yeah.
Did you say?
And Tom.
I do remember that, as a matter of fact. My son's grandmother was named Selma, so, and his grandfather was had taught in Fresno, so.
It's Dick Ellsworth and Seaver were all from the same area.
Yes, Seaver was a Fresno guy. So came to the Mets in a very, very convoluted manner. He was drafted originally by the Braves, and they broke some sort of contractual rule with him, didn't offer him something. He became a free agent, and they picked straws, and the Mets came up with him, and he was the absolute franchise.
That was their lucky day.
Yeah, absolutely. And he is still in Northern California to this day. He runs a wine grapes.
He's got a vineyard in Northern California.
Vineyard.
A great article. You should look this up. The Daily News just ran a fabulous article, I think by Bill Madden, on.
I read that article that he's over Lyme disease, and he just he's talking about pitching and what have you, and he's not really into the Mets anymore. He talks about that. Yes, an excellent article. May he live forever, because, boy, since the Mets, it's been a jinx for the most part since they got rid of him.
I really do feel for you, Ralph. Because
but you can't.
You've been a long-suffering fan of a team that, wins about once a decade.
Yeah, that's it. But those wins, let me tell you something. 1969, I had just gotten out of the Air Force, and when they won against Baltimore, that was very incredible. But not just the the Mets, the Knicks, the Jets, they all put it together in that 1 year, and it made long-time suffering come together. And they won in '86. It was great. I was out here in '73 when they lost in the World Series, but I got to see the sixth game, and it's been difficult. Right, you're right. But on the other hand,
there are high points, and you enjoy the high points.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to look at it that way, and I feel for the teams, the fans of teams that just have never won. How about the Cubs all those years? There were folks that were born and died Cub fans and never got to see them win a game.
And I'm so severely scarred by 1969 that I can't feel any Rahmanis at all for Cub fans. When they were long suffering, I just wanted the suffering to go on for another century.
Yeah, with the Black Cat thing, with Ron Santo and all that, it was a very, very... And the ironic part was that Leo DeRocha was managing them, and he was doing things at that time. I was going, whoa, he's in the papers talking bad about Ernie Banks. And I'm thinking, there are things that you do, and there are things that you don't do as a human being. In Chicago, as a motivator, as someone who wants to win, you don't talk bad about Ernie Banks. And he handled that situation very poorly. But the irony was he was the first manager that I got to watch as a kid when my grandfather took me to the Polo Grounds in 1951. I wasn't even 5 yet. And,
he was a very polarizing figure. When he was your manager, you loved him, but, when he was the manager of an opposing team, he was the worst person on the planet.
Oh, right. And he was, indeed, as a human being, close to being the worst person. He had very few redeeming qualities. He was a little bastard. I mean, no question about that.
Top to bottom.
Top to bottom, exactly. His morality was out. He was reputed to have stolen Babe Ruth's watch, and my godfather Tony D'Angelo told me that there are some very strong stories going around that Babe Ruth beat the crap out of him for that. That he beat the crap out of him and stuffed him in a locker for doing that. But beyond that, he just was not a good person. But that you put him on the field, you put players on the field. That's why and not just baseball, politically, business leaders. A lot of our heroes that we said they have clay feet kind of thing. So that was, you got to root for the talent. Like my favorite entertainers, Willie Mays, Frank Sinatra. All these are very, very flawed human beings, and just human, gray. Some good, some bad, some worse than others. Some things are despicable. You root for their talent, you respect their talent, and you don't.
Yeah, but it's always very nice, Zig, when you can actually admire somebody as a human being and as an athlete, and that's pretty rare. I mean, one of my
rare,
heroes.
But when you look for it, it's there. There are enough folks out there. I talk to a lot of people. I try not to. I'm cynical by nature, but I don't think cynicism is a bad thing. It's you have to be enlightened to look at things. I'm not a Pollyanna, but I see good all the time. I see a lot of good folks that are talented and not affected and are the same as they were before, the same coming up as same now as they were when they were coming up before they had the bugs. And some were assholes before they had the bucks. That's not going to change. Bucks just enhance it.
Yeah, well, like I said, one of the guys who I admired and still do from very early on was the guy we mentioned before, Sandy Koufax, who, played basketball in the Jewish community house that was around the corner from me, and, went to my high school, and I just, grew up thinking that he was, a great, admirable person. But, the more I've gotten to know about him, I mean, he's very quiet, and he, doesn't intrude his opinions where they're not asked for, and he's just, seems to be a pretty admirable and reticent kind of guy. And I look at that and I compare him to some people like, let's say, DeRocher, and I'm saying, yeah, I think you can tell, who are people who, just have good values and, which are people who have terrible values.
Yeah. Well, I have an easy thing. I go through life, I go, you can't blame them, blame their parents. So, that's...
Okay, well, that's very generous of you, Dick.
Yeah, well, doesn't always hold. It's not always easy, but if you look back, we've all had upbringings that are different, and damn it, we're all damaged. Let's put it that way. And some of us more than others, and some of us respond more, and some of us react to the pressures in the same manner over the years. If you're pressured by something and you react, you'll tend to do the same thing over and over again. And a lot of it is who you hang out with, who you do. If you can change, if you're open to change in life, it makes things a lot easier. If you're less rigid, if you're less judgmental, if you're more understanding. But all that comes with getting older, and some people do it and some people don't, and some people don't do it all the time, and some people, you can't be perfect all the time.
Well, maybe I can get to the point where I can be so understanding and so receptive to other people that I can look at Leo DeRocher with some compassion, but I'm not quite there yet.
I read an autobiography, you never will be, a guy named Isinski wrote an autobiography of DeRocher that I went, whoa, why am I reading this? It's terrible, every facet of his life. So you don't need to but just think, were his parents removed? Were they, was he raised in an orphanage? That kind of thing. I don't remember what his circumstances were.
Well, one thing, I've got a question for you, and maybe I can let you just mull this over, is that what I've noticed is that there are several really great fielding shortstops in Major League history who couldn't hit, but they were such good fielders that they actually held down a full-time job, and they were all of French-Canadian descent, and they all came from the same general area in New England. This is DeRocher, who came from Springfield, Massachusetts, and Mark Belanger, who came from the same area, Belanger, and Rabbit Moranville, who was also a great fielding shortstop, who couldn't hit at all, and who came from New England. I'd like you to figure out what it is about, that part of the world that gets these three guys of French descent to be great shortstops.
Well, how about we go back to that little town in Venezuela, St. De Marcos or whatever, that has probably produced 15 National League shortstops or big league shortstops.
San Pedro de Macorís.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't know.
Very interesting.
Something in the water.
Something in the water. Springfield, Mass, near Holyoke,
Mm-hmm.
where my cousins grew up. And as a matter of fact, I spoke to someone this evening who I did not realize. His name is Tanyan Sturtz, former big league pitcher.
He pitched for the Yankees.
Yes, he did, and I didn't realize he was from Worcester, which was right across the way from Holyoke. They played each other on Thanksgiving Day. They had a football bowl game on Holyoke and Worcester, and I would have mentioned it to him, but didn't. Yeah, Tanyan Sturtz was a big league pitcher with the Yankees, and I knew him when he was a minor leaguer with the Modesto A's. I was the Topps representative in those days, and I'd go around to the different teams, meeting players and signing them to their Topps contracts, and signed him 28 years ago to his Topps contract. Pretty scary how fast time flies. And it's flying tonight. This is a great episode. I hope you'll come back and chat with me all the time.
Yeah, I'd love to come back and, we got more territory to cover.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steven.
My pleasure.
Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, I'm Ralph Tyko. I will end the show by imploring you, Steven, and everyone else out there to keep your dreams wet, keep your humor dry, keep your kids out, and your grandkids too, out of military recruiting offices of all kinds. Just keep them away, and keep the kids off the laps of clerics that wear dresses, and all will be much better. I wish you the best. Thank you, Steven. Come back soon.
So long.
All right, so long. Bye, everybody.